introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. He's the Vice President for Research and Chief Economist at BDC. He leads a team of experts in analysing economic data to identify business trends and sector trends impacting Canadian entrepreneurs. And then he travels from coast to coast to coast across the country, helping businesses understand the risks and opportunities presented by the economic environment so that they can better position themselves to take action. He's also one of the most approachable and most media-savvy economists I have the pleasure of knowing, and he has a real knack of bringing economics to life in an informative and uncomplicated way. So if you haven't already done so, I encourage you to check out his blog at bdc.ca, where he shares his perspective through punchy and topical nuggets, pulses, economic pulses, I think is the word, Pierre. So he shares his information in a very digestible and easily understandable way. So please check out our website. He comes to BDC around 4 to 5 times a year, so we're very lucky to have him back in BC. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome BDC's Chief Economist, Mr. Pierre Cleroux.
Thank you, Louise, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. What I would like to do this afternoon is, in the next 15 minutes, I'd like to give you a perspective about how the economy is going to look like in British Columbia for the next 2 years. So in order to do that, I'm going to start with the world economy, because as you know, our economy is very open to the world, so what's going on around the world is really having an impact here. Second, I'm going to focus on BC, and third, I'm going to try to answer to 3 questions that are top of mind. And I kept the best question for the end. One is going to be the next recession. So I kept this one for the end. I want to keep your attention until the end. So if you want the answer to this one, you have to stay with me. So first, the world economy. The world economy is actually improving. It continues to have a strong growth. The growth is going to slow down a little bit this year, but we are still in a period of growth that is going to going around the world. Is it better like this? Yes. Oh, okay. I can hear myself now. So we're still in a period of growth, and this period of growth around the world is quite unique because there's no recession in the world right now. There's no major economies who are in recession, something we haven't seen for a long time. Over the last few years, for example, Brazil or Russia, they were in recession. But actually today, all the major blocs around the world are having positive growth. As you can see from the graph, the pace is quite different. Mature economy like Europe and Japan have slower growth, but nevertheless, they are growing as an economy. For example, Europe, despite the dispute or the negotiation with Brexit, their economy continued to grow at a solid pace, and the unemployment rate is going down. Emerging countries, India is probably the country which presents the best potential growth for the next few years, and growth this year is going to be over 7%. China is slowing down, for they have challenges at the domestic level. However, the growth, as you can see, is still over 6%, so that's still very significant. So the good news is the world economy continues to grow and there's no recession. But of course, the most important economy for us is the United States. 75% of Canadian exports are going to the US, 50% of BC exports are going south of the border. So what's going on in the United States is always having a big impact in Canada. And the news are good. Growth last year, almost 3%. This is the best growth over the last 10 years. And growth should be almost as good in 2019. The economy is running almost at full capacity. The unemployment rate now it's 4%, which is the lowest unemployment rate that we have seen in the US for the last 50 years. So it's getting more and more difficult to recruit people, salaries are increasing, but despite the fact that the economy is running at full capacity, they are still creating jobs. In January, the US economy created over 300,000 jobs in 1 month, after have been created 250,000 in December. So the US economy continued to grow and continue to be running at full capacity. So the question is more, how long this is going to stay. You cannot sustain a growth like this for very long. So we expect to see a slowdown in 2020 and 2021. But this year, the growth will continue to be strong. As for the recession, well, you have to keep listening until the end. So what about Canada? Well, the Canadian economy is a bit different than the US. It has started to slow down. It started last year, and this year the growth is going to be below 2%. There's two reasons for that. Interest rates are increasing, which is having an impact on the Canadian economy, but also the oil price is up by 25%, which is of course having an impact in some part of the country, Alberta and Saskatchewan. So this is slowing down the Canadian economy. So the growth is going to be good, but not as good that we have seen over the last few years. But the good news in Canada, there's no recession. For the first time in many years, because Newfoundland was actually having a recession over the last few years. So for the first time in many years, all different parts of the country is having positive growth. As you can see, at different pace. And the good news is BC is going to have the highest economic growth this year. Well, this is not a surprise because this has been the case over the last 5 years, but still, it's always good to be number one. So, what is very interesting is the BC economy is still performing well. It's going to perform best growth in the country, but it's changing. The growth is going to come from different parts than what we have seen over the last few years. Over the last 10 years, the BC economy has been growing at an average of 2.7%. This is phenomenal. This is by far the best growth in the country. But growth is slowing down. For the next 2 years, the economy is going to grow just over 2%. So why is the economy slowing down? Well, there's actually two reasons. The first reason is the economy, the BC economy, is running at full capacity. And one example of that is the shortage of labor that you are probably experiencing every day. You have probably difficulties to recruit people, well, you're not the only one. That's one of the reasons why the economy is slowing down. It's getting more and more difficult to recruit people. The unemployment rate in British Columbia is at the lowest in 40 years, 4.7%. That's basically the lowest we have seen. The number of jobs vacant is it's at a record high, almost 5%. Almost 5% of all the jobs in the province are vacant because companies are not able to find people. This is by far the highest in the country. The other province who have a high level is Quebec with 3%. So at 5%, you're far ahead. As a result, companies are not able to recruit as much as they would like. This is limiting their growth. This is limiting their investment. And as a result, it's limiting the economy growth in the province. So that's the first reason why the economy is not going to grow at almost 3%, but more at 2.3%. But there's another reason. The other reason is interest rates are growing. As you know, the interest rate has been increasing over the last 2 years, especially last year. In Canada, we have seen interest rate increase 3 times. And this is having an impact on consumer. And the reason why it's having an impact is because our debt ratio is high. So the graph that you see, the red line is the important one, is actually the increase in the amount of Canadians are paying in interest payment every month. So over the last 12 months, Canadian interest payment has increased by almost 15%. So as interest rates are increasing, every month, consumers, Canadians, they have to pay more for their mortgages. They have to pay more for their car loans. They have to pay more for their line of credit. As a result, they don't have as much money to spend. This is having an impact on retail. This is having an impact on the housing market. The reason why it's the case is because our debt ratio is quite high in Canada, 172%. This is actually much higher than in the US. And in BC, it's almost 200%. So the impact of increasing interest rate is a bit bigger here. And we can see it. The retail sales last year increased by 2.2%, much lower than the increase over the last few years, just because interest rates are increasing. In the Great Vancouver area, which includes Surrey, As you can see, the car sales have dropped by 5% last year. I don't know if everybody can see that. But that's the reason why. Interest rates are increasing, so people don't have as much money for consumption, especially for the big items. And this is especially true in an area where residential area or housing sales or housing prices are high like Vancouver. Actually, the numbers are similar in the rest of the province, but they are not as dramatic. The other impact is on the housing market. Housing sales in BC has declined by 45% over the last 18 months. And housing starts are starting to decline. So this is the impact of an increasing interest rate, and this having an impact on the housing market and on consumption. But I want to remind you, like for example, housing start is slowing down, but it's still quite elevated. So this is not like a disaster, this is not a crisis, it's just going back a little bit to a more, I would say, a balanced market. Because still last year, despite of the decrease, the number of housing starts was much bigger than 5 years ago. So that's the second reason why the economy is slowing down. However, there's some good news, and one of the good news is export. BC export has been increasing significantly last year. So the export market is still very good. The demand from the rest of the world, especially from the US, is strong. And also, the dollar is low. So as a result, export has been increasing and they have been supporting the growth in the economy. The second good news is this new project, the LNG project. This is going to have a huge impact on the economy for the next 10 years. And I want to show you the impact on investment. The LNG project, if you take the impact every year, this is going to increase business investment in the province by 15%. One single project is going to increase business investment by 15%. So that's how significant this project is for the economy. We already saw that the value of the non-residential building permit increased by 5% in the province last year. So this is already having an impact. And if you look at the north part of the province, actually in the north coast, the value of the non-residential building permits has increased by more than 400%. So this project is going to have an impact on the entire province, especially on the north part of the province, but it's still going to have an impact here because it's such a huge project. So export and new business investment projects are going to keep the economy going. So the BC economy continues to grow, but at a slower pace than what we have seen over the last few years. And that's probably the new normal. In the next few years, we should expect growth around 2.3%. And again, this is the best growth in the country. As for the Canadian dollar, it's low, and it's staying low. Today it was 75 cents, and has been quite low for a while. There's three reasons why the Canadian dollar is remaining low. The first one is interest rates are increasing faster in the US than in Canada, putting pressure down on our dollar. The second reason is the oil price. You know, we sell a lot of oil. We export a lot of oil. Actually, 20% of everything we export is oil. So as a result, when the oil price is going down, this is having an impact on our dollar. And that's exactly what's happening now. The third reason is uncertainty around trade issues. The negotiation between the US and China is also having a negative impact on our dollar. So for those three reasons, the dollar, we believe, is going to stay low, around 75 cents, for the next 12 months, which is good for exporters, not as good for importers. So what does it mean for entrepreneurs? What does it mean for you? Well, if you are in the export market, the business environment is still very, very good. First, the world economy is growing, and especially the US economy is running very well. So the demand for Canadian products and services is going to remain strong. And as I said, we believe the dollar is going to remain low for a while. So this is still a very good business environment for our exporters. If you are focusing on a domestic business, well, the growth in the economy continues to be solid at 2.3%. However, you have to keep in mind, as interest rates are increasing, retail sales are not going to increase as much in the next few years as they did in the past. Also, if you are in the residential construction business, there's no question that this sector is slowing down, and it's going to slow down for the next few years. So I'm going to conclude the presentation with 3 questions that we believe are top of mind. That's the most frequent question I get as a chief economist. The first question is, are interest rates going to keep increasing? As you know, interest rates have been increasing over the last 2 years, both in the US and in Canada. In the US, for example, interest rate increased 4 times last year. The prime rate is 2.5%. Like I said, the US economy is performing very well. It's running at full capacity. So we believe the interest rate will keep increasing in the US for this year. Not as much as last year, but we should finish the year around at 3%. So there's going to be probably 2 increases during the year. In Canada, the story is a bit different. The Canadian economy is slowing down faster than the US economy. So we don't believe interest rates are going to keep increasing in Canada, especially for the next 6 months. If we see an increase, it's going to be after the summer, only if the Canadian economy is having a good performance. So the Bank of Canada is going to check how the oil price is going to evaluate and what will be the impact on the Canadian economy. They are going to also look at the impact of interest rate increase on Canadian consumer. So before they can increase interest rate more, they have to evaluate what is already the impact on the Canadian economy. So to the question is, are interest rates going to increase? Well, definitely in the US. We expect that for probably 1 or twice. Not so sure in Canada, probably not for 2019. The second question is about shortage of labor. I'm sure you're facing as business difficulties to recruit people. The question is how long this is going to last. Is this a temporary question? Is this a temporary issue, or this is going to last for a while? Well, the unemployment rate in BC right now, like I said, it's an historic low. This is the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years. As you can see from the graph, has been much lower now than even a few years ago. There's 2 reasons for that. The first one is the economy has been good, has been performing well. So the BC economy has been creating a lot of jobs over the last few years. That's good news. The other news is that it's not so good, it's because we are aging. The second reason why we have this shortage of labor is because our population in Canada and also in British Columbia is aging. In about 15 years, imagine 24% of Canadians and people living in BC, this is the numbers for BC, are going to be over 65 years old. This is going to change many things in our economy. Just imagine the impact on our healthcare system, for example. Our healthcare system was built when we were young, and now a quarter of the population is going to be old. So I don't want to depress you, so I won't talk about this. This is for another day. This is for another topic. But I want to talk to you about the impact on the labor force, because this is the reason why we have a shortage of labor. In the next 5 years, 5 million Canadians are going to retire. So that's the reason why we have more difficulties to recruit. And unfortunately, the growth of our labor force, that used to be about 1% in BC, it's barely not increasing. It's increasing by 0.3%. So this is close to 0. And the reason is because a lot of baby boomers are retiring, more actually than people who are joining the workforce, coming from our colleges and universities and high school. So unfortunately, this situation is going to stick around for about a decade, because the baby boomers for the next decade are going to leave the labor force. So as business people, you have to realize that this is not a temporary problem. This is not a temporary solution issue. So we have to prepare for that. We have to manage our human resources in a different way. And we have produced in September at BDC a study related to that. And I invite you to go on our website at bdc.ca. You can have the full report. Here you just have the summary of the strategies. What we suggest, what we believe are the best strategies. First, as employer, we have to have a better employee value proposition. We have to change the way we keep our people and we attract people in our businesses. Yesterday I was having dinner with a group of BDC clients, and one of our clients was explaining that over the last 12 months they totally changed the way they compensate their employees, the way they manage the workplace, because they want to retain their people. They want to retain and they want to be able to attract their people. Second strategy is we have to use the underused group of the labor force. Despite the fact that the unemployment rate is low, there's some part of the population where the unemployment rate is much greater. That's the case for immigrants. That's the case of young people with no experience. That's the case for people who have disabilities. So as employers, we have to be much more open-minded about the labor force. Finally, technology is growing very rapidly. It's exploding. And there's a lot of opportunities for business to reduce our need for workers. In my last trip in Vancouver, I was visiting a client, they are in the manufacturing space. They couldn't grow because they couldn't find people to work for them. So they actually ordered a new equipment made for them because they couldn't buy one. And this is really helping them to grow their business. This is not, he was not able to replace people, and his idea was not to replace people, but was give them the ability to grow their business. So technology can really be a big help. Finally, the last question is, what is going to be the next recession? You know, I decided to put this in my presentation after Christmas. During my holiday, you know, everybody asks me what is the next recession. When you're a doctor and you meet your family, people will tell you stories and what do you think this means? When you're an economist, people ask you about interest rate and the next recession. So I thought I would put it in my presentation. A lot of people think that we need a recession, or a recession is coming because we had 10 years of economic growth. Well, recessions just don't happen like this. They just don't happen because we had 10 years of economic growth. They happen for a reason. So we look back over the last 40 years, and the graph that you see is actually the Canadian economy growth. When it's negative, it's because it's negative growth for the last 40 years. So we had 4 different recessions in Canada. The first one, maybe some people will remember, in 1981, inflation rate was about 12 to 14%. And the Bank of Canada decided to control inflation to rise interest rate to 19 and 20%. Some people were paying 20% interest rate on their mortgages. I know it's hard to believe today, but some people remember that. The good news is they were a success. They controlled inflation. The bad news is, as you can see, they created an amazing recession. So that's the longest recession we have seen in 40 years. Second recession, 1991, we got a shock from the outside Canada. The oil price increased very drastically. 2007, a lot of people remember this one. The shock came from the US. There was a housing bubble in the US that created a financial crisis and then created a world recession. 2015, in Canada, we had a small recession because the oil price dropped this time by 60%. And it created a kind of small recession in Canada, a much bigger recession in Alberta, of course. So what we learned from the past is you need 2 things to create a recession. Either you need to increase interest rates sharply, or you need a shock. So we're looking at what could cause the next recession. First, interest rate. The graph that you see is the inflation rate in Canada. The inflation rate in Canada has been stable. It's lower than 2%. Even after 10 years of growth, the inflation rate is low. And if I had the US graph, the pattern would be the same. So this is a good news, because there's no need to increase interest rate rapidly or drastically. Interest rate doesn't have to increase because of inflation, because the main mandate of the central bank, the Bank of Canada or the Fed, is to control inflation. So the next recession is not going to come because we increase interest rates significantly. There's no need for that. And they have been increasing the interest rate, but this year the Bank of Canada is slowing down because the economy is slowing down. So this is a good news. The recession is not going to come from there. Of course, there's a number of shocks that are possible. And here I put a number of risks to the economy. We don't believe actually that any of these risks are going to lead to a recession, but that's something we are watching for. The first one is the debt ratio of our consumer. In the US, the debt ratio is still low. After 10 years of growth, they still have a low debt ratio because the last recession was extremely difficult. In Canada, our debt ratio is high. And that's a source of concern. However, there's a few factors that are reassuring. The first one is our debt ratio is plateauing. It's actually slowing down. Second, our job market is very strong. So as long as people have a job, they can pay their mortgage. Third, we are seeing the impact now of interest rates. So consumption is slowing down. The housing market is slowing down. But this is not causing a crisis. It's creating a slower growth economy. So that's the scenario we're working on. Not a recession, but as interest rates are increasing slowly, the economy is slowing down. Another risk is the oil price. The oil price dropped by 25%, which is slowing down the Canadian economy, but not causing a crisis. 25%, of course, is not 60% like in 2014, but also the Canadian economy is more diversified now. So the impact of lower oil price doesn't have the same impact today than it did in 2014. So we're a bit more protected against that. Finally, the negotiation between the US and China could cause a slowdown in North America. Let's imagine they don't agree and they have a trade war. Well, that would definitely have an impact here in Canada. But we're very optimistic about that because the negotiations are doing well, they are doing better. We also believe that none of the two countries, the US or China, can afford to have a trade war. These are the two biggest economies in the world. They know that if they have a full trade war, this is going to be negative for both countries. So neither of them have the advantage to do that. So when is going to be the next recession? Well, we don't see one. What we are seeing right now is an economy that had a long period of growth and it's slowing down. We believe that in the next few years, the growth both in Canada and in BC is going to be slower than what we have experienced over the last few years. But we don't believe this is going to lead to a recession. We believe this is going to be a soft landing. So for the next few years, you should expect growth, but a bit less than what we have seen in the past. I think we have time for questions. So